Hi there, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Trauma Survival Guide. And in this episode, the question I want to address is, do I have the right to feel traumatized? Now, this might sound like a strange sort of question to be asking, but the truth is it's really key to how we understand our own traumatic experiences and how we're able to cope with and manage them. So, as I said in the second video, What is Trauma? I spoke about how the definition of trauma has sort of shifted in recent years away from the idea that trauma has to be connected to some really big catastrophic event that everyone can see and objectively say that was traumatic, like a war or a car accident, and how the definition has now shifted towards an understanding that trauma is something really subjective, and what one person experiences as traumatic, another person may not be all that fazed by. So I think it's right that trauma is seen now in more subjective terms. I think it's really helpful, but in the general population, and most people who don't spend their time understanding the latest trauma research, there's still this view that in order to be traumatized, you have to have been through something that everyone can look at and see and say, okay, yeah, that was a traumatic event. So you still get a lot of people who go through hidden traumas or traumas that maybe wouldn't affect other people, and they still get told, oh, you're just being too sensitive, just get over it, it wasn't such a big deal. And I think that then confuses people about what it is they're experiencing and gives them a sense they don't really have a right to be feeling traumatized. So I just want to give one personal example now. And I think everyone watching this video knows that I'm in Israel and we're in the middle of a war right now. So when the 7th of October massacres happened and our country found itself in the middle of a war, very quickly me and Colin decided that I should take the children to England, and we were out the country for a month. We then came back for a while, then we went out for another 2 months and came back not so long ago. And no one, actually, I can't think of anyone who questioned my judgment to take the children out in those circumstances. And nor did anyone question my right to be feeling stressed and overwhelmed, given the enormity of what was happening around us. But something that I didn't share with everybody, I shared with closer friends, was that even aside from the war, I actually needed to get out and have a rest, because the year leading up to the war had been a really stressful one for our family. We'd had there were a series of different events, starting last March when Colin was involved in a serious road accident, when another car skipped a red light. Colin was fine, thankfully, but it was a trauma for our family. And then a series of issues with my son and his schooling, and when I tried to stand up for him, I personally was on the end of horrible attacks from the school system that were just exhausting and personally very, very wearing for me. So that by the time the war broke out, I was already at the very end of myself, and I had no resources left to be able to cope with this new reality of being in a nation at war. So I was very aware that the war, we would have gone even without those personal circumstances. It was right to leave the country just because of the war. But I was also very aware that the war kind of gave me this legitimacy and sort of a cloud cover to get the rest and the restoration that I so badly needed. And it was like a ticket that meant there were no questions asked about me totally disrupting our family, disrupting the children's education, taking them out of school, going for an extended period to a different country. And in all honesty, I don't know that I would have felt that I had the right to take such bold steps if it was just a question of the day-to-day stresses and strains of life and the personal difficulties and traumas that we've been through in our family over the last year. And I don't know. I don't know how other people would have perceived it if those were the reasons that I disrupted our family. I don't know that it would have been seen generally that I had the right to feel as traumatized as I did by those much more subjective events. Over the last few years, I've really come quite strongly to a belief that no trauma or any other sort of emotional problem happens just on an individual level. All of us live within families and communities and societies, and all of these have their own accepted norms for which emotions are okay to feel, which emotions are okay to express, which events are distressing, which ones shouldn't be distressing. Within every community, there are these hidden, unspoken rules. And because human beings are naturally pack animals, we naturally want to be within a group and we're socially motivated, we all try our very hardest to follow these unspoken codes of conduct that exist within our communities. But the problem with trauma is that trauma it blows apart all of the normal expectations and ideas of what's acceptable. And if we find ourselves experiencing trauma, if we find ourselves completely overwhelmed and out of our own control and in above our head with whatever circumstance it is we're going through, then for us, those feelings are very real and very vivid and very frightening. And it doesn't matter whether our society says we're allowed to be having them or not. When you're experiencing traumatic stress, you're experiencing it, regardless of whether anyone else says that you should be or whether you have the right to be. So within our communities, when we experience trauma, we have two choices. I'm talking now about the sort of trauma that our societies wouldn't really validate or give legitimacy to. So we have the choice then of, do we take our own needs seriously, and do we say, okay, even if other people don't think I should be feeling the way I am, this is how I'm feeling, and I need to step back, I need to take a break, I need to put some actions in place in order to get back into control, to rest, to get well again. Do we take that bold action even though other people around us might think that we're doing something wrong, that we're being selfish, that we're being weak-willed? Do we take that strong action at the risk of losing some of our social affirmation? Or do we bury those feelings down and think, well, I have no right to be feeling this way. My community says that these things shouldn't be a big deal, so there must be something wrong with me. I'm going to try and keep the codes of conduct, the acceptable behaviours of my community, and I'm not going to act on these feelings that I'm sure must be wrong feelings. So let's think for a minute again about that thrashing fish I spoke about in the introduction to this series. You can go back and watch the first episode, the introduction, but I gave the picture of a fish that finds itself caught on a fisherman's hook. And the other fish in the water can't see that hook, So they just see that this fish is wildly thrashing around and making a big scene and a spectacle of itself, and they think that it must have completely lost its mind because they don't see the hook. They don't see what this fish is trying to get free from. So when we're experiencing trauma, we have this choice. We have the choice of saying, okay, if I'm experiencing these feelings, if I can feel there's a hook in me, even if no one else can feel it, if I can feel my own mind and body's responses to traumatic stress, then I need to take a bold action to get free from this hook. We can choose this, or we can choose just to stay still so the other fish won't think we look so strange, at the risk of being dragged out of the water and probably eaten for the fisherman's breakfast. So that's I mean, the sorts of traumas that I'll probably touch on these. I mean, this is now going into much deeper territory, so I'll probably go into this more in future episodes. But the sorts of traumas that people would often not share would be, there are many traumas that have shame attached to them. So you think of domestic violence, you think of sexual abuse, children experiencing violence and abuse, children who don't have the ability, the concepts or the language to even explain what they're going through. It's often the weakest members of our society and those who, for whatever reason, don't have a voice, who experience the least validation for their traumatic experiences. And these people are the ones who are most likely just to get written off as unbalanced, unstable, mentally ill, children with behavioural issues, and actually the reality of the trauma, the reality of the hook, for it not to be seen or picked up upon. So I feel this video has just gone very, very deep. I'm sorry if it has been triggering for anybody. And I think that these are issues I'll come back to in future videos. But yeah, in this video, just to create that space and say that whenever we find ourselves experiencing the signs and symptoms of trauma, then that response is valid. The feelings are valid. We have the right to feel traumatized. What we do with those feelings, the conclusions we draw, and then how we act upon them, they're things that we need to be helped to think through the wisest approach to responding to trauma. But the feelings themselves, if we're feeling it, then it's valid. And it's important when we have those feelings for us to make space for them and to acknowledge that they're real. So on that note, I will say goodbye, and I'll pick up some more of these themes and take it a little bit further in future videos. Bye for now.